Now, again, we're going to talk a little bit about the two-party system in American history. So basically what we're going to deal with at the top here is when all these political parties came into dominance, who supported them, and who their leaders were. Then at the bottom, we're just simply going to add, like this whole, the way these notes are set up and the way the sections are set up, they're backwards, if y'all have noticed that. Like section 3 in your notes is actually talking about section 4, okay? So it's beginning to be a little bit confusing for you all, so it's just better if I show you the notes and then we talk about it. So at the bottom, like I said, you've got 4 definitions. The first one there is the word incumbent, okay? During an election, guys, if someone has already held the office and they are running to be re-elected again, they are considered the incumbent, okay? Which means that they currently hold the office. So for example, you got Trump and you have Biden running for office right now. Of those two, which one is the incumbent who is actually holding the office and is seeking re-election? Trump. Y'all with me? So beside of the word incumbent, and again, I have it on the board if you get behind me, just put down that it's the person currently holding office. Okay? Now, understand something. If Trump is re-elected this year, and then he goes through his 4 years, the Republicans would have to nominate someone new in 2024, right? Democrats will nominate someone in 2024. Will there be an incumbent in that election?
No.
No, there won't. So you guys see that, right? The incumbent is the person who currently holds the office. All right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if somebody like serves as president like for one term and he gets beat, can they run again later?
Technically, yeah, but more than likely it would be very difficult for them to get a nomination because they've lost. Like Hillary Clinton, you know, like she didn't get nominated this time because she lost an election. If Biden were to lose, he probably would not be nominated again because what else is he going to say? The American people told him no. You know what I mean?
So that makes what's his face very odd.
Who's what's his face?
The old dude.
That narrowed it down.
Yeah. Well, there's the only like 80-year-old dude that goes out trying to be.
Cognitive challenge.
What's his
Bernie
name?
Sanders?
What?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, that one.
Oh,
He's not ever. He didn't.
He
win.
went in twice, didn't he?
Yeah, but he had enough money to run like on his own. He never won
Yeah.
the Democratic nominee.
How's he got so much money?
Politics,
He's 80 years
man.
old.
Like I've always
Politics.
just like wondered.
It's amazing how people go into Congress and not have money, but when they leave, they've got millions. It's corruption,
Yep.
more than likely. All right, so incumbent is a person currently holding office. The next one, you got the word faction there. Guys, a faction is a group of people who basically disagree with what's going on, okay? So it just says that it's a group that dissents. Basically, they object to everything. They do not like how things are going or what's being proposed to be done, so they just have a disagreement with it. So it's a group that dissents. Basically, they break away. They don't like it, okay? The next word, number 27, it has here. I should have told you this word, or you should have known what this word is before you even entered this class. Okay? The word electorate simply means the people eligible to vote. So anyone who is a registered voter who meets all the qualifications to vote is a member of the electorate. Okay? And you'll see that word quite often moving forward. So make sure you got it in your brain. And then the last one down there, the word sectionalism. Sectionalism, just put down that it's an interest of a particular religion. And why we talk about that is throughout American history, you have certain religious groups in certain parts of the U.S., and it's sectionalized. You know, you're not going to live in these areas if you don't agree with what they're trying to do. You understand that? So sectionalism is a devotion to the interest of a particular religion. Okay? Now, that's kind of how
religion
that works.
or region?
Region. Oh, I said religion. I'm sorry. Region. It's a religion and region. Like they would live in that region because of their religion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, where did my... Okay. All right, has anybody got any questions on that? Is that pretty simple? Everybody with me there? All right, now let's, we're going to add a couple things to this. So at the bottom of this paper where you have a blank, okay, write down this word right here, spoil system. All right, spoil system.
What's the difference between an actor and an actress?
Male, female.
That's what I thought.
So again, down here at the bottom where you have a little bit of room, write down the spoil system. We're going to talk a little bit about it because it'll show up on your test. And you just simply need to know what it is. All right. So with the spoil system, put down that it's a practice of awarding public offices. So it is a practice. So it's a practice of awarding, let's put down, offices. A practice of awarding offices. And then it goes on to say contracts and other governmental favors to those who support the party in power. So here's how we're going to put it down. It's the practice of awarding offices for those who support the party in power. And here's what I'm getting at with this. And you see it in politics all the time. When someone is elected to the office, they try to put the individuals with them into certain capacities in their office because they've helped them get there. Does that make sense? Trump done a tremendous amount of that. He put a lot of people as secretaries and stuff that he thought was loyal to him. If Joe Biden were elected, he's going to do the same thing. So the spoil system is giving people offices simply because they supported him through their candidacy. Okay, is it right? Probably not, because you can probably find a more qualified individual. That's just the way it is. And basically the spoil system is you spoil the people that support you. Okay, does that make sense?
Sounds right.
It can be, definitely can be. Okay, so basically, guys, up at the top of your paper, here's how we're going to deal with this. We're talking about the nation's first parties. I told you all this the other day. A lot of the political parties we've literally had since the beginning of our Constitution. All right, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, they were factions against certain things. One of them wanted the Constitution the way it was. The other one wanted the Bill of Rights added to it. So we've always been separated by something. You guys remember George Washington and the Founding Fathers were anti-political parties because they thought that they would create a lot of friction, which they do, okay? But it is what it is. We have political parties. Now, on the chart that you have in your notes, it kind of starts with the Federalists, which happened in the early 1800s. And then we basically go through 1970, all right? Now, the reason we only go to 1970 is because from that point to now, we've basically flip-flopped from a Democrat to a Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, for 8 years at a time since that time period, okay? So the Republicans nor the Democrats have ever really been in power. Does that make sense? And I really think it's just because the American people want something new all the time. I truly do. So I feel like if President Trump gets his 8 years in office, the next president will be a Democrat. Just because that's how we've done it for about 30, 40 years now, okay, 50 years, okay? So what we're going to do is we basically got to fill out 3 little charts beside these things. So we're going to start with the Federalist Party, okay? Obviously, it was the nation's first political party. Obviously, their battle was over the ratification of the Constitution. They wanted a strong national government and policies that help commercial and manufacturing interests. We've talked about what the Federalists did. You don't need to recap everything. We just need to know when they were in power. All right? So beside of number 1, where you have Federalist on your paper, put down that they were strong before 1800. Now, guys, in order to understand this, use common sense. Were the Federalists needed after their point had been made? They got what they wanted with the Constitution, right? So was there a need to have them anymore? No. So obviously they're not going to last much after the ratification of the Constitution. Ratified the Constitution in 1787, right? These guys were gone before 1800. Makes sense. They weren't needed. They got what they wanted. Okay? Now, the people who supported them, this is the one that your notes does a very terrible job of letting you know. Okay? So you're just going to have to listen to me and kind of take my word for it. But the supporters of the Federalist Party, I'm in number 2 right here, put down that they were rich and they were born into wealth. Okay? The rich and the people who were born into wealth. That's the second one.
Was Donald Trump rich when he was born?
I know his father had money. I don't know if he's exactly rich
Small
per se.
woman of $1 billion.
Very small. Very, very small.
I actually think he lost it, didn't he?
No,
$1 million.
because he was bragging about it.
To his father.
And I'm pretty sure.
No, I'm pretty sure if, per se, a few websites, he got a lot more than $1 million, but he lost more than 3/4 of what his father gave him, and somehow he profited out, and then started his own and tripled it in 6 months, and then times it by 10 the next year, and then was skyrocketing.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it all went down. I just know that he took a loan from his parents or his dad, like you said.
Imagine taking a loan for your parents.
See.
Don't have to go to a bank.
See.
Just-
See, sometimes
If I got
you just need to whip out the willie, put it in a fountain, and go on with
to,
it.
some days you have to
I would just go across the
That is-
So,
use 100%.
the rich and the well-born, and then one of the leaders of the Federalist Party, they're on the board. You can put down either one of those guys with Alexander Hamilton or John Adams. I would just write down their last name. And again, guys, that's something you already knew. Okay? So, that was one of the earliest political parties that we have. Now, the idea that we're going through this chart is just to give you a sense of who dominated what eras and what was kind of going on in American society when these political parties were in control. You guys with me? Because before the 70s, you actually have the same type of, you don't have the same type of scenarios that's going on now. We didn't alternate back then. Like if the Republicans were in charge, they stayed in charge for 20 or 30 years. And if a Democrat got in charge, he stayed in charge for 20 or 30 years. They didn't flip-flop a lot like we do now. Okay? So, the next one you have on your paper is called the Jeffersonian Republicans. So we're talking about Thomas Jefferson and his political party. Okay? So when were they in power?
96.
Put down that it was from the 1800s to the 1820s. Okay? Now, the Jeffersonian Republicans in your notes is being called a different name. Same concept. But it's funny to see those two names together being one political party, right? But it happened to be that way in the early 1800s, okay? So this group wanted more of a limited national government. So these Jeffersonian Republicans kind of were similar to the Anti-Federalists, so to speak, okay? The Anti-Federalist wasn't real sure about how strong the national government should be, so they wanted it limited. These guys kind of followed suit with that. All right. So the people that helped to support it says was farmers, planters, laborers, and small business owners. So instead of writing all that in number 5, let's just write down common people, just your average run-of-the-mill people. Okay. And when you got this group in power, guys, they obviously wanted to limit the national government. There was a strict interpretation of the Constitution. They felt that how it was written in the Constitution is the way that it should be. That's how our founders meant for it to be, and that's just the way it was going to be. Okay? But common people, and then obviously the leader is Jefferson. You could write down James Madison if you wanted to. But I'm pretty confident you guys can remember who the leader of the Jeffersonian Republicans were. Thomas Jefferson, right? Simple enough. Hopefully that keeps the same.
I bet the next one was Jackson.
You know which one?
Jacksonian.
No, which Jackson?
Andrew.
Oh boy. So, after the Jeffersonian Republicans had their way for roughly 20 years and the common people got what they kind of wanted, we kind of make a shift, okay? So from the 1820s to the 1830s, you have the Jacksonian Republicans. But before Democrats. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you a little bit about how the Democrats and the Republicans split, okay? So, it says the election of 1796 was the first time two parties fought for the presidency. If you guys remember, Federalist and Anti-Federalist. The Federalists won, but they faded before 1800. We already have that down. It says the Democratic Republicans later split apart and gave rise to the Democratic Party. So eventually these two factions could simply no longer agree on things, so you have a group of them that split away. All right? So, I'm not sure if that's exactly what it looked like when they broke up, but people were swinging stuff at one another. So apparently it was a bad deal. All right? Now, as far as the Jacksonian Republicans go, it says the Democratic Party won 13 of 15 presidential elections from 1800 to 1860. Now, I want you to drop down to number 22 on your paper before we fill out any more of this chart. Okay? You guys see where it says the era of Democrats from 1800 to 1860? Y'all see that? It's asking us to describe the major issues for each of the following periods. So basically, it's giving us a time period for when these people were in office. Y'all got me? And it's wanting the issues that they had to overcome that basically forced them out. Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about what the Democratic Party did. It expanded voting rights. That's a good deal. It expanded voting rights to white males who just, if you remember, white males who owned property were the first ones that originally got to vote, right? Well, they expanded it for white males and not just those with property. They put a huge increase in the number of elected offices around the country, and they spread the spoil system. So that was some of the things that they did. All right. Basically, you get a new group coming in after them, which is the Whigs. But here's what we need to understand. Why did the Democratic Party fall off? Okay? There's two reasons that I want you to write down. There's actually about 5, but there's only 2 of them that I want you to put down. This is number 22. Y'all with me? And it's the same thing that kind of hurts Democrats now. All right? Put down high tariffs. And then the other major issue that they had to tackle was slavery. Okay? High taxes and slavery. Now, we're going to go back up to the top of this, and you're going to see why the Democrats lost power. Okay? Up beside the Jacksonian Republicans, in number 7, they were in charge from the 1820s to the 1830s. That's number 7. So basically a 10-year period there. Okay? The people that supported them are very similar to the type of people that supported the Republicans, but you have small farmers, slave owners, and pioneers. Emphasis on the slave owners there. All right? And then obviously their leader is Andrew Jackson. So from the 1800s to the 1860s, the Democratic Party, so to speak, now the guys, Republicans owned slaves too, but the Democratic Party was the base majority of slave owners. So when the issue of slavery came about in the 1860s, were the Democrats more so in favor of it or opposed to it? They were in favor of slavery. That's because the vast majority of the people that supported the Democrats at this point in time owned slaves. You guys understand that? Now, here is why the entire South basically votes Republican to right now. A Democrat, with all this going on, the Democrats liking slavery, they got rid of it, right, in the 1860s. So when they got rid of it, it basically turned the South Republican. Y'all see what I'm getting at? Because they got rid of the one thing that they had that benefited them. Okay? So, the Jacksonian Democrats, small farmers, slave owners. When the slavery issue became too much, that's when the Democrats faded out for a little while. Okay? So after the Democrats, you've got the Whigs. Okay? And there again, the Democrats drew support from slaveholders, small farmers, pioneers, right? It says their greatest rivals were the Whigs, who were supported by wealthier merchants and industry-style people. So, in number 10, beside the Whigs, their period of dominance, put down from the 1830s to the 1850s. So basically, at this point in history, people grew tired of Republicans and Democrats and started putting into office Whigs. Okay? And these people were more well off than what you would think the Jacksonian Democrats and the Jeffersonian Republicans were, because the supporters they have, I have them up there on the board in red. Just put down wealthier individuals with industry interest, big business. These people like big business, big money. All right. And they kind of dominated politics for about 20 years. Now, in my notes, it says they never really dominated. The reason that it says that is it just wants me to make sure that you guys understand that Democrats and Republicans have dominated the federal level of elections, but there were Whigs in place at this point in time. Okay? Now, as far as their leaders go, if you notice, it don't really say anything about it. But we are going to put down that it was a guy named Webster and Tyler. Webster and, well, not Tyler, Taylor, excuse me. Just put down that I will not ask you that question. Okay? I'll ask you who was in support of the Whigs, but I will not ask you who they were. All right? All right, so when the period of the Whigs kind of fell off, it says that the reason that they debated was the biggest obvious reason was slavery, split the Whigs and the Democrats. The Democrats were split between northern and southern factions. Obviously, the southern factions wanting to keep slavery, the northern factions of Democrats not wanting to. It says many Whigs and anti-slavery Democrats joined the new Republican Party. So people that were against slavery joined the Republican Party in 1854. So you have like an ideological switch happen. You see what I'm getting at? So the era of Republicans. So after the Democrats won 13 or 15 elections dating up to about the 1830s, the Republicans come in and take power, and they win 14 of 18 presidential elections for roughly 90 years. Okay? Now, what was some of the things that the era of Republicans had to deal with? Let's look at number 23 down here. If you look at that time frame, there's quite a bit going on. The first thing I would like for you to put down is the Civil War. Because the Civil War started in 1861, right? Went all the way through 1865. We fought that war based on the Democratic and the Whig suspicions of slavery, right? So with them breaking apart, that actually gave the Republicans a better way of getting elected because they were unified, where the Democrats and Whigs should have been together. They kind of split, which divides votes, right? So the Civil War. Well, after the Civil War, what had to happen? You had the Reconstruction period, right? So obviously write down Reconstruction beside of them. And then, guys, if you'll notice the year that all happened for the Republicans when it all went bad, it was 1932. So that means that there was an election in 1928, right? Every 4 years, right? So if there was an election in 1928, that means that a Republican was put into office, right? And then by 1932, a lot of people disliked that Republican. Why? What happened during his presidency? What major economic crippling thing happened? Yeah. So they put down the Great Depression. So guys, use common sense. The people of America, are they going to want to re-elect the party that just brought them into the Great Depression?
No.
No. So that's where it kind of ended for them. Okay? So,
That was the Republican Party?
yeah. Now, remember, there's an ideological switch going on right here. Like, Lincoln is a Republican. But when emancipation, all that happened, the ideological flipped. Like all the South was a lot of Democrat, and then it turned Republican because of all this. See what I'm getting at? So, up at the top beside Republicans for number 13, you got 1860 to 1932. That's when they were in office or dominant. And you had a wide range of supporters when it came to the Republican Party at this point in time. So in number 14, put down farmers, and this included African Americans. Okay? Why would African Americans be Republican at this point in time? Republicans are anti-slavery. Y'all with me? So it makes sense. They don't want to be enslaved. So you have African Americans. You also have people that might have a lot of money. You have people with financial interests and things of that nature. Okay? So let's kind of review what we just did. So the Republican Party, like I said, won 14 of 18 from 1860 to 1932. It says the Civil War crippled the Democrats. Okay, you fought a war on your own soil with a Democratic person in charge. Same thing happened with a Republican in charge during the Great Depression. You want to change. Okay, it says all their power was concentrated in the South, which they controlled for roughly 100 years after Reconstruction ended. But then it says the Republicans basically take over at this point. Okay, they had the support of farmers, laborers, business, and financial interests, and they freed African Americans. Okay. So they freed African Americans. The Republicans benefited from years of economic prosperity. So you've got people of all walks of life supporting this one type of political party, and they're doing very well economically. Everybody's making money. Y'all guys understand that? And then 1929 happens, and nobody's making money anymore. We have an economic downfall, right? So that party that's kind of led us into economic excellence now has let us down, right? According to the American people. So, what are you going to get in after economic turmoil? It says the Republicans won by appealing to a wider range of voters, but the Democrats gained new support outside of the South. You know, people losing money and losing their farms and losing everything they have is really going to make you think differently, right? I need to change who's in office. So, after the Civil War, we all kind of know what happened. At the top of your paper, it says the post-Civil War Democrats in number 16. Post-Civil War Democrats. Put down popular, or when they were dominant, put down they were dominant in the South. In the South. They never were nationally dominant. They just were in the South, okay? And then put down as far as supporters go, simply write down the South.
Yay, yay.
Okay. And then look at number 24. It says the return of the Democrats. Now this is from 1932 to 1968. So that answers number 19. The New Deal Democrats. Put down 1932 to 1968. And this is your political shift here, guys. Y'all remember FDR? He got elected to 4 terms. He was the person that brought us out of what? The Great Depression. He saved a lot of people's jobs and helped them do that, okay, by creating a ton of things in order for them to be able to get jobs, all right? So, who supported the New Deal Democrats? In number 20, right down the South. Farmers, minorities, and big city organizations. So they literally had it all. Small farmers, minorities, and big city organizations. And then the list of individuals who led the New Deal Democrats is quite impressive. The first one, FDR, makes sense. JFK and Lyndon Johnson. Okay. Now, if we look at number 24, it says Return of the Democrats and what they had to deal with. Well, obviously they dealt with the Great Depression, the New Deal. What war was going on between 1932 and 1968?
World War II.
Good. World War II. And then we had a president get assassinated during all that, which was which one? Kennedy, right? So, and then from that point on, guys, we've kind of flipped back and forth. Democrat, Republican, Republican, Democrat, back and forth. Okay? So, with this, guys, it just gives you an idea of the two-party system. There's always been one of two parties that had a legitimate chance of winning. Even though we may have a ton of them, it never really comes down to Democrats and Republicans. Okay? Is everybody with me on that? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I don't know how many of you's already done